Hi everyone, welcome back to the 21 and Sensory podcast with me, Emily. On today's show, I have special guest Sophie Broadgate. Sophie is an autistic writer, director, and filmmaker based in Cumbria and Manchester. Sophie's work spans across narrative, documentary, and art film. She started her career in production, working as a production assistant and independent producer. As a producer, she has seen her work screen at BFI Flare, Queer Lisboa and Palace International Film Festival, and soon at the BIFA Manchester Film Festival. Over time, Sophie has transitioned to work more as a writer and director, focusing on personal subjects. Her debut short film, The Water Tower, was developed through Lost Stations, which is a residency programme for artists with Cumbrian roots. The film was produced independently and self-funded, later receiving a grant for festival distribution. Sophie is currently developing a slate of short films with the aim of moving into features, and has been working on addressing accessibility in the film industry for autistic people. So, Sophie, would you like to say hello?
Hi, that was a really good introduction, like super detailed.
Okay, phew.
I was like listening, being like, oh, that sounds pretty good actually.
Oh, that's me. Great. Okay, good. Always nice to have feedback on like how I've like researched.
It's also really nice to hear you do the intro live, because I've heard that intro so many times over the past year that I was like, oh my God.
She's introducing me. Well, thank you so much for being up for chatting. Obviously, I think we're going to have a lot to talk about, just like because of your background and everything you're interested in. But I do like to start with diagnosis. Obviously, I've said you're autistic, but if you could discuss that diagnosis and maybe any others you have, that kind of always is a sort of starting point for my podcast, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the first diagnosis I got when I don't think I ever got an official diagnosis, because I don't think it happened as much back then, but I think that doctors would say I had anxiety from maybe 7 years old or something like that. And when I was really young, it kind of centered around health anxiety. So I didn't want to go to school because I was afraid of getting ill. I was afraid of germs, that kind of thing. And that kind of, I think I diagnosed myself with OCD maybe when I was about 12. And I think I mentioned it to one of my friends and she was like, no, you don't have that. Because I think back in the day, it was like OCD is about cleanliness and it's not particularly about other anxieties. So, I think I've still got OCD, again, not officially diagnosed, but I've definitely sort of got tendencies. And I think instead of it being health anxiety these days, it's more about like checking things and like checking locks, feeling quite unsafe, and sort of having thoughts that you can't really control, and thoughts where you can kind of say like, oh, that's not real, but emotionally it feels real. So I guess sort of, when I was living in Manchester, because I live in Cumbria now, like you said, I did have kind of fears of like people breaking in and things like that, which isn't out of the realms of possibility. But I think like even if there was like 5 locks on the door, I'd be feeling unsafe. And then I think when I was like 21, I got diagnosed with depression. And that was the first time that I'd felt like a proper kind of like clinical depression. I think I've probably had depression beforehand, but maybe just on a lesser degree, probably more anxiety before that. And I think it was that transition from university into the adult world and kind of having to make money and work all of the hours that sent me under. Because I didn't want to, so I studied in Manchester and I didn't want to leave. At the time, I thought it was a failure to come back to where I grew up. So I did everything I could to stay in Manchester. So I think I overworked myself into multiple burnouts. And then throughout my sort of 20s, and I'm 33 now, so 20s and into my 30s, every single year I would have like a massive burnout. And I kept on going to the doctors and sort of describing what the burnout felt like. And they were like, oh, well, you just need to take some time off. And I was like, well, I have taken time off and it's not working. So there's something going on.
Mm-hmm.
And they sort of shoved antidepressants at me and things like that. And I've tried lots of them. And I think they can be really beneficial for some people, but they really didn't work for me. And I think they made it worse, if anything. If anything else, yeah, it wasn't the right fit for me. So I think I just had an inkling that there was something going on with me that was different to what the doctors were describing. And I think I'd always had a sense that I was like socially different. Like I've always enjoyed time on my own from being like a really little kid, and sort of would have, very strong interest with animals and would spend hours just watching bugs and talking to people about them, even if they weren't listening. And I think that throughout my teenage years, I guess I learned how to mask. So these like little pieces of information just started coming back to me, and I started to form a picture that maybe I wasn't as confident as I thought I was, and actually I was much more anxious than I thought I was. And at the time I was working, so I've always worked as a filmmaker, but I was also working as like a project manager in a creative charity.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing this project called Animate Autism, where I was working with young autistic girls and women. So I spent one-to-one time with all of these people, and I was thinking, they just seem exactly like me. And I remember saying to my boss, like, I don't think these girls are autistic. And she was like, well, they are. And I guess that sort of made me realize that what I thought autism was completely different. And I guess, as we've discussed, as you've discussed on this podcast, the presentation in women and feminine leaning people could be different. So that kind of like sparked this little idea off in my mind that I was like, because they were just describing like they had the same interests as me, they had the same problems at school, they were like dropping out of education. And I think I just mentioned to my boss at the time, I was like, I think I might be autistic. And she was like, oh, yeah, of course you are. And I was what? I was like, what? And she was like, well, we thought that you knew. And I was like, oh, okay.
Thanks for that.
And this charity that I worked for was a charity that I went to when I was a teenager to learn how to make films. So they'd known me for like my whole life, really.
Okay.
And I think that they probably just got used to me being the way I am. So they didn't treat me any differently. And I think that when you're in artistic circles, as you'll probably understand, you do get people who do think differently. So you're just like, well, I'm just an artist, so that's why I'm different. So I had all of these other labels that explained why I was different, which is like, I'm an artist, I'm queer, anxiety, depression. So I just thought it was that. But then when I started talking to my boss more about it, because her partner at the time is autistic, she knew a lot about it. So started talking to her, and then I reached out to a local autism charity and sat in a pub with the woman that runs it and just like told my life story. And she was like, yeah. She was like, it does sound like it, but she's like, I'm kind of surprised because you don't present as typically autistic. And I was like, okay. So that kind of said to me that I'd learned how to mask. So I kind of like self-diagnosed myself at first, and I thought like, oh, that'll be enough. Like, I don't really need to have an official diagnosis because all that mattered was that I knew. And maybe if I could learn what autism is, then maybe I could treat myself differently and have a happier life. But then one day I just got this feeling in my stomach that I just wanted to know for sure, because I think that, I guess it's a really autistic thing that you want the fact, you know? So I just wanted someone to tell me officially so that I could say with confidence that that's what's going on. So I went through the diagnosis process, and I went through it really quickly, actually. I think I was quite lucky because I've heard like other people on your podcast talk about how long the waiting list was. And I don't know why mine was really quick, but I was really lucky, and I got diagnosed last year just before Christmas. So they rang me just before Christmas to be like, here's a Christmas present, you're autistic.
Oh.
And I was really happy at first. Like, I just felt like super euphoric, I guess, because I guess it kind of gave me permission to be exactly how I want to be. You know, I was saying to myself, well, if I don't want to go out, then it's fine because I'm autistic. And if I want to be alone, that's fine. So I had this like initial high.
Okay.
And then I just was suddenly hit with this like crash of like, I guess like unprocessed trauma and yeah, all of these feelings that I guess I'd never let myself feel. And with the answer and the key of autism attached to all these memories, I guess I had to like reprocess my life. So then I went into like a really, really bad depression, which resulted in me moving back to Cumbria actually, because I realized that like the sensory input that I was getting in Manchester was just keeping me on this level. So I was already like really high, you know, in terms of like sensory input. And then all of this unprocessed trauma on top of it,
Mm-hmm.
it was just impossible to sustain. So I moved back to Cumbria like 4 or 5 months ago.
Okay.
And it's been much better for sort of like, yeah, having time to think, I think.
Mm-hmm. Like for me, things kind of started to like slide into place in terms of like realizations about like my childhood, or like, you know, why school was difficult, why, you know, secondary school and uni and stuff like that. Did you, because that's really overwhelming, like all that stuff like coming together, and you're like, this is why I am the way I am.
Yeah, totally. I think that like, I think what sort of took me under in a way is like, I guess I've been using bad words to describe myself, and I think that other people have been using bad words to describe me, like, oh, dramatic or sensitive, like in a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought there was something wrong with me, so I just thought that I couldn't cope and that I was weak, or you know, that I wasn't cut out for the world, basically. um yeah, I was looking back on a lot of memories and just being like, oh, that's why I had a problem when I was maybe in my teenage years, where I would just go mute, and I didn't realize that's what it was, because I would go mute in big groups and then I'd come home and I'd talk,
Mm-hmm.
so my family thought I was fine, but I didn't realize that like when a group gets to a certain size, I just get so overwhelmed that I guess I just shut down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
um And even just, I think that since I've been sort of going through the process of unmasking, I think I've just been having lots of experiences recently where I probably didn't like them when I was a kid, but I just got used to them. And now I'm like unmasking. I'm suddenly like, oh no, I really don't like that at all. Like,
Yeah.
I went to the dentist yesterday, and I think I had it in my head that I was like, oh, the dentist, it's fine, whatever. I like, you know, like chatting to people, which is incorrect. Like, you know, all of these things. And I left the dentist feeling like totally spaced out. And I was like, oh, I really don't like the dentist at all.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you're almost like you were seeing it in a like a different lens, like now that you kind of have this thing confirmed about yourself, you're like, oh, actually, me myself, I don't actually like this environment.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
yeah.
totally. And I think as well, like, I think maybe for a long time I was kind of like disconnected from my own feelings, which I think is a common experience with autistic people, is that, yeah, we get so used to people telling us that our reactions are wrong,
Mm.
that we then sort of like disconnect from our feelings. So I think since I've been reconnecting with them, I can sort of identify when I'm feeling anxious now, because I guess like I have memories from being a kid and saying like I felt worried, and everyone was like, well, don't be worried. And you're like, well, I guess I shouldn't be worried then.
Yeah, it's not that easy though.
Yeah, exactly. And these days I just go like, well, I will be worried. But it takes, you know, the confidence of an adult who's been through a lot of therapy to be like, no, I am worried, so leave me alone.
Yeah. And also, it's really difficult to hear that, or also have your head tell you, like, you know, just, you know, negative stuff in general. I just feel like if you're autistic as well, it's like a whole nother level of like trying to reason with yourself and trying to not listen to your head is harder. I don't know if that's if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that like a lot of my friends who are neurodivergent, and yeah, I've had this experience as well, is that like when your brain takes over, you lose like all connection of your body. And I guess it's like a disassociation in a way, but you become so focused
Mm.
on your thoughts that it is hard to shut them off until you've addressed whatever you're obsessing over, I think.
Mm-hmm. And knowing that like your brain isn't like it's not like spouting the truth all the time. It's not like it might just be throwing you stuff to like literally throw you off, which is not very helpful.
Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, like I said, I've been in therapy for quite a few years, and I think it took me a long time to realize like some of the things that were coming up were like trauma response basically, and like my brain being like, this is reality, And it's taken me so long to be like, hold on a second. No, this is not, this isn't reality. And I don't need to pay attention to that thought.
Mm-hmm. And just out of interest, obviously you are late diagnosed. Like how did you manage at school? How did you manage within like an education setting? Obviously you've mentioned a little bit about like working and stuff, and I think we'll get onto that. But like, did you struggle with the sensory environment? Like, were you someone that was academic and could kind of go under the radar a bit? Because that's what I hear a lot from a lot of people, is that they're either well behaved or academic and, you know, don't draw attention to themselves almost and go under the radar. So I'd be interested to see what you think.
I've had both of those experiences. I think I was in high school, I was academic and shy, so I just went under the radar. And I had lots of friends that were nerds as well, so I was quite lucky. But in primary school, I had an awful experience because I think I'm pretty sure that I'm dyslexic. And back in school, I went to a primary school that was like in the middle of nowhere, and it wasn't a great school. Like they tried, but I think that like the combination of it being in the 90s, not understanding mental health, and also just being in a really small school that got away with a lot of stuff was like a really bad combination. So I was struggling at school, but I was so shy that I wasn't saying anything. So there was like a period of time where like I was really struggling with like spelling and grammar. There was also like a period of time where I couldn't tell the time and I didn't tell anyone. So instead of like addressing these things, I just stopped going to school for a while. And my mum couldn't figure out what was going on. And I think that like she thought it was my health anxiety. But I eventually told her that like I was really struggling with maths. And I think that like I just built up so much anxiety about it. And also like the thing that they do in school where they like pick on you and ask for an answer, and like the attention that you get in the class just like
horrible,
so overwhelming. And I think every report card that I got back would be like, Sophie needs to contribute more in class. And so I just felt really bad about the fact that I didn't want to talk in front of people. So instead I would just like pretend to be ill. And I think my mum figured it out in the end. But I think that because I like struggled so much, I think that my teachers thought that they actually called me stupid. Which like wasn't the case at all. And I know that now, but I think as a kid, when you hear that, you're like, well, they're an adult, so it must be true. And I think they wanted to put me in for like lower level SATs so that I couldn't attain like higher grades, because they wanted to be safe for their like, I guess their marks.
Yeah.
But my mum was furious, and like I'm really lucky that my mum is like a really frightening woman when she wants to be.
Amazing.
Which is like what every shy autistic kid needs, is like someone to advocate for them. And she marched into school and was like, this is absolute crap. Like she comes home and she reads like the encyclopedia, and she's like, you know, she knows how to code on the computer. Like she's not stupid at all. You're just not teaching her properly.
Yeah.
You need to put her in the higher level SATs, and I'll help her with her homework and stuff. And yeah, so my parents used to sit with me, especially my dad, because my dad's a scientist. So he used to sit with me and do my maths homework. And yeah, it was very traumatic for both of us because I was just crying over my maths. But yeah, I eventually got through, and then I got really good marks. So I went into high school with like really good marks, and it was like a fresh start, and I got put in top sets. So then I was with people who, I guess quite a lot of the people that I was around potentially were neurodivergent themselves, or were intelligent enough to sort of respect difference. So I had an okay time in high school. I think that I kind of like, I didn't have a very typical high school experience in that I didn't like go out that much. I had like my group of friends and stuff, but yeah, I would more like, my friends were all like musicians and stuff, so we were all in bands and we would do kind of like creative stuff together.
Okay.
So I think I've always made friends through doing creative projects rather than making friends through just going to parties.
Yeah.
And I think that continued into sort of sixth form. But I think that sixth form is where I kind of found myself properly, because I think in high school I would just not talk to anyone that I didn't know. And I did get bullied a little bit, but not super severely. But I think because I was like physically small and quiet. I did get like shoved around a bit and things like that. But generally, like, I think that people recognized that I was just like a nice person. So mostly they'd just leave me alone and not give me any attention, which kind of suited me.
Yeah.
And then in sixth form, I came out as bisexual at the time. I now identify as queer, but I think coming out was like a massive relief for me. And that was like, I guess, like the first unmasking of being like, this is me, and like try to let go of some of like the guilt and shame that I had about it growing up. And then, yeah, I just made loads of friends that were like me. I think that in sixth form, I did sort of all creative subjects. And so I was just around people that wanted to make things happen and wanted to do things differently and experiment, I guess.
It sounds like you really kind of found your people and like, other people who were interested in the same kind of stuff like as you. And I feel like sixth form really does that. Like if you pick like three A levels, I also did like creative stuff as well. You just naturally are drawn to the more like creative like crowd of people. So that's nice. It's nice to hear. And how did you find the shift from sixth form to uni? Did you go straight from sixth form? Did you have to like move to go to university? How was that?
You know what? Like, surprisingly, I think because I had such a good time at sixth form, and I think because I felt really accepted, and I knew that I had a really strong base at home, and I always knew that if everything went wrong, I could come back to Cumbria. I think I was feeling incredibly confident when I went to uni. So, and I also think I'd been quite independent growing up. So I liked being on my own. I liked sort of figuring things out. So I think that like living away was totally fine. I think that what sort of stressed me out a lot was just the noise of Manchester. So I used to live near Oxford Road, like one of the busiest traffic routes in Europe, apparently. And
Okay.
it's really polluted and it's not super green. Like everything's really grey. And I think that I'm really affected by colour and like the energy of a place. So I think that like I was fine living on my own, and I think I was a little bit overwhelmed in the first few weeks, not because of the people that I was living with, but more the people on my course. Because so I went to uni, when I was 18, so straight out of sixth form, and I think quite a few people on my course had taken a few years out, so they were so much older. And I think there's quite a difference between being 18 and being like 20 or 21. Or even like 19. I think that, maybe if I'd have done it again, I would have taken a bit of time out, but I definitely felt so much younger. And I think I've always felt a little bit younger anyway. And I think that's probably an autistic thing, like an arrested development. So there was like, I just felt like there was such a big gap between me and the people on the course that I felt it was really hard to make friends. And I think I ended up making a few friends in the end, and I had like a core group of people, but we were all like the outcasts. And I guess like there's always popular sort of people in every educational situation. So I just sort of like avoided them. But I got on really well with all of the people that I ended up living with in like second year. There was like I think they did really well in kind of, I think half the people I lived with in first year were like on creative subjects. So there was like half of the corridor. So I lived with like 10 other people. So there's like 5 of us on one end, and we were all creative people. So I think I just hung out with them all the time, and I barely hung out with my course mates. I think what I found really difficult as well is like the feedback and rejection sort of stuff that you get at university. I think like to this day I find it like quite hard, but I think gotten more used to it. But I think when you're fresh into it, when you're 18, and you start to get feedback on creative work, especially that's really personal, you start to just feel like, oh, well, I'm just rubbish. Like I should just, quit. And I think in second year, I considered dropping out because, I just thought that all of the work that I was making was rubbish, because that's what my teachers were sort of saying. I mean, they weren't saying it was rubbish, but I think that like I was getting sort of like middle range grades. And I think really it was just because I'd come from the countryside, and lots of people had come from like cities where they'd had access to more modern technology and things like that. And I was coming from more of like an ideas person background. And I'm good with tech now, but it didn't come naturally to me when I was younger. So I just had like so much to learn. And because the course itself wasn't really that technical, I definitely struggled with those things. So it was kind of like an art school course, but it was film. So even though they wanted you to be an ideas person, I would always get bad marks because maybe I didn't know how to use the camera properly or something like that. So I nearly dropped out, but then something happened. I think I just grew up quite quickly from the end of second year to third year. And I just came back with like this wave of energy in third year. And I think I had much stronger friends as well in third year because I'd known some people for like 2 years at that point. So I think I just felt like in a safety bubble of people. And I'd also started to become more comfortable with my queerness because even though I came out when I was 15, I didn't really explore it until probably like later on in university.
Wow, it's so interesting to hear like just almost the kind of like peaks and waves that you've like kind of been through, and you know, now knowing that you were autistic, you know, your whole life throughout all of this and didn't know. It must do you feel like it almost kind of, do you feel kind of proud of yourself for having like got so far? Because it's a lot to grow up and not know, I feel.
Yeah, totally. I feel a mixture of like pride and also a more negative word as well, I guess. I think I feel proud that I managed to like stay in Manchester, that I managed to I've always had jobs, like whether it was working in the film industry or when I first graduated, I worked in like HMV, which was the worst sensory nightmare, but I made it work.
I can only imagine.
Because I worked part-time. I think that probably something in me knew that I couldn't work full-time if it wasn't in film, like if it wasn't in like a special interest. So I either worked in like retail or I worked in bars, which again, like sensory nightmare. And I remember like one night I called my mum and I was like walking down the street to my bar job and I was like, I feel like I'm going to die. I'm so tired. And she was like, you're not going to die. Just get on the bus. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll go to work then. So I guess like I only did that for so maybe like 4 years. I did like retail and bar jobs. Then I did like film on the side. So I'd get occasional paid work, but it wasn't enough to pay my rent. I think I'm quite proud that I managed to stay in Manchester all that time. And I think like very proud that I managed to build a film career out of nothing because I didn't have any previous links to the film industry or anything like that. But I think I'm not proud of staying for as long as I did in Manchester because I think maybe the past like 3 years that I was there, probably internally knew that I shouldn't be there. But at the same time, I was so afraid of this idea of failure that I'd like made up for myself that if I leave Manchester or leave a city, that I'm just not a good filmmaker anymore. And when I finally let go of that idea and I moved back here and I was still making work and people were still interested in working with me, I was like, oh, so I just made up this like reality that wasn't true.
But I can see why you thought that though, because I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, you know, the city is like the place to be if you want to like make it kind of thing. And I get like, you know, maybe you wanted to stay there because, you know, you knew it and you might have had a kind of network of people. But you're right in that it should be your talent and it shouldn't be based on your location as to how well you do kind of thing. Like I get it's good to be, you know, central sometimes, but it doesn't mean you can't travel there if you needed to film something or something like that. So
yeah totally.
It's and like you said, like the background that you came from shouldn't kind of influence, you know, how you get on a uni course. Like I also was on a uni course where they expected you to know the software when you got there, and it was like, hang on, I'm paying £9,000 a year, surely I should be being taught this on this course. And a bit like you, like with, you know, like the production equipment and things like that, like what if you don't have access to that sort of thing? And I didn't even have a laptop when I started uni. So it's just things like that where they just don't appreciate where students are coming from,
Totally. And I think it's another autistic thing is that I think when the people around me say like, oh, this is what you need to do to make it, I take it as truth because I only speak the truth because I can't lie.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just so influenced by everybody else's ideas of what success means. And every time I got wrapped up in that, I just felt myself get really ill. So I think sort of redefining what success means is like the ultimate autistic goal for me. Is like, yeah, how can you make the work you want to make or do the thing you want to do without, abiding by everybody else's rules?
Mm-hmm. And I think this is something that I've said before, is that I feel that because I'm autistic, I am quite vulnerable to other people's like criticisms, but just like exactly like you said, like, oh, they must be speaking the truth because they're in a place of authority or something like that. And it's so hard to not, just take things as the truth. And like you said, like you just want to be like truthful and like honest all the time, but other people aren't like that, and I don't understand why.
It's very confusing, isn't it? Like,
so is.
Yeah, it took me a long time to realize that not everyone else was thinking the way I was thinking. And just to come back to that, like, idea of, yeah, taking on people's ideas as truth. I said to my friend recently that I feel like I just don't have any defense mechanisms or like any like skin almost. Like, so if somebody says something to me, it just like goes straight in and I absorb it. And that's it. Like, I felt it then. So it's like, there's no way for me to be like, hold on a second, do I want to listen to this? It's already gone in and I've already been affected by it. And she was like, yeah, but that's a beautiful quality to have. And I'm like, yeah, it is in some ways, it's there is like a beauty to being really sensitive. And I guess that like you'll feel this as well. Like as a creative person, I think it can be really beneficial to have that sensitivity and that sort of like way of absorbing things. But sometimes it can be quite painful.
Yeah, like especially when, I don't know, a client comes back with some amends and you're just like, that's going to change everything. It was so beautiful and you just want me to turn it around, and it's like, oh. It'd be interesting to just discuss like how does being autistic like affect or like influence your work now that you know, kind of thing. Like, do you feel like it's had an impact at all?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because when I got diagnosed, I started looking back on old work, which is something that I do like now and then just to kind of look back on. It's almost like having a diary of your life and sort of a diary of how you felt at the time. So I was looking back on work and I could just see my autism through everything that I did. And suddenly, like, all of the narratives that I was trying to tell made sense through the lens of autism. Because I think, like, I would often get feedback like, people don't think like that, people don't feel like that. And now I look back on them and I'm like, well, these characters are autistic. Like, they're experiencing things, as an autistic person and making decisions, as a neurodivergent person. So I think it's always informed my work. And I guess it's probably why I came to filmmaking. I think filmmaking's quite, a suitable thing to do as as an autistic person because it's so visual and it also lets you sort of experience things behind a camera and behind some kind of barrier between you and the real world. But I think since being diagnosed, I guess I've been making work about autism in a more direct way, and I think that's what I've been trying to do. I think as I go through my career, I think I try to be more and more direct and more honest because I think it's really easy and quite tempting for me to hide behind metaphor or hide behind something that's really abstract. But I think I'm trying more and more, I guess, like unmasking through my work. So trying to tell something in a way that everyone can understand and not just people who are like academically trained in film.
That's nice though, that the like people might get a sense of you, like you, through your work and not just just like a professional kind of looking film and stuff, because really, I don't know, that's what you want to kind of shine through, is that it is your work and potentially your kind of style, or kind of, I don't know, it just kind of reflects you in a way.
Yeah, totally. I think I've always made work in quite a sensory way. I think I realized that, like, looking back on a lot of my early stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd had conversations with producers before where they were saying, like, well, why do you need this shot? Like, why is it so close? Like, why are we looking at this? And to me, it felt so important because I always want to zoom into everything and I want to see, like, all the details.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that feels very emotional. But they were like, no, we don't need this. Like, let's just have a wide shot. And I've come to like the wide shot now. You know, I think I've developed into it and, like, I understand the need for wide shots. But when I was young, I would just, like, zoom into everything. Like, I used to have a little handy cam that I would take around with me.
Mm-hmm.
I would just zoom into the pavement and I would just zoom into everything.
Almost like you're magnifying it in your own
Yeah.
eye. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, totally. And I said to my girlfriend recently, like, I can actually feel my eyes zooming in on things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you become, like, hyper focused on something, and you'll probably get this with, like, graphic design, is that I can actually feel, like, my eyes, they start to hurt because I can just feel that they're honing in and focusing so hard on something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I see, like, a bit of dust, for example, and I can just zoom in and I can see, like, all the texture of it and I can see, like, everything about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I'm like that with film as well. I think when I'm editing things, I'm always zoomed in. And then, like, I have to, like, actively be like, no, zoom out and try and see the whole picture.
Yeah.
Because I'm just getting obsessed about this tiny thing that no one's going to see.
But I think realizing the small details and bringing those out, and you just having a totally different, I don't know, outlook and lived experience, that's way more interesting.
Yeah, it is. And I think that, like, it seems to be, yeah, celebrated. Like, if you look at, like, the history of cinema and lots of art forms, like, all of the people that are celebrated seem to me that they're quite neurodivergent. And yeah, there's so many filmmakers that make really surreal, abstract work that I look back on it now with the sort of lens of autism, and I'm like, that seems so autistic to me.
Yeah.
Like, the decision to focus on that.
Okay, so along the lines of what we've just been speaking about, do you think you could discuss, like, what you've been doing to address accessibility in the film industry for autistic people? And maybe we could also chat about how important the working environment of the film industry can be.
Yeah, so I think my early experiences of working in, like, the mainstream film industry kind of put me off. Because like I said, I came from, like, an art school background where it was all small teams, very sort of low key thing. And then when I actually started working in the production department, I was working on commercials. There was, like, loads of people on set, really, really long hours. Like, I used to have to get up at 5 a.m. And then I used to work in the production office as well. So I would, like, work on the set. Then I'd go back to the production office and do all of the backing up. I worked for a really small company, so they didn't really have the staff to do all of the jobs. So I was doing a million jobs.
Okay.
And I used to find it, like, if I'd been in the office all day and then I had, like, tasks to do, I would end up, like, staying there until, like, 8 p.m. And I would find it really hard to leave because I was, like, in a mode of obsession. So I'd start doing, like, tomorrow's, list, and I would just get stuck there. And then the idea of, like, getting on the bus and going home, because at the time, like, I couldn't afford a car or anything like that. I just didn't want to go home because it was like an effort to leave the place that I was in. So I think after a while, I totally burnt out of working on, like, mainstream sets. And that's how I came into, like, independent producing. And I started working on kind of, like, independent, small budget stuff with my friends. And that's how I started to figure out, like, a different way of working. And it took a long time to kind of get the resources and the budgets together to actually sustain myself as a freelancer full time. But once I did that and I kind of met people that felt the same way as I did about the film industry, then I guess it's been in the works for quite a long time, doing work within the film industry, but also outside of it. So I kind of see myself as being, like, both in and out of it. So I dip into it to kind of, like, learn stuff, for contacts, for resources, that kind of thing. but then I have to push away from it because I just find it so, well, it's just burnout territory. And I think that even people that work in the film industry who aren't neurodivergent, they say this as well, is that like sometimes it can be so traumatic working there because you're just like running on empty the whole time.
Yeah.
That I think that quite a lot of people will end up leaving the film industry because of that. Or I think that there's like an anonymous Twitter account or maybe an Instagram account actually, and I can't remember the name of it, so this isn't super useful, but it's people who are partners of people who work in the film industry, and they give like testimonies of like what it's like, and they just describe their partners as like zombies and like lifeless, and that's totally right. Like even if you're not autistic, it's already a tough industry to work in and a very unfair industry based upon like privilege. And so you add on any extra differences, whether that be like neurodivergence, race, anything at all, it just becomes an impossible environment to be in. And I think that there have been changes, but I think that the narrative around how big those changes have been is incorrect. And I think that there's still a lot of lip service happening around accessibility. And I think that you often read applications saying like, oh, we really want neurodivergent people to apply.
Yeah.
But then you inquire on what kind of things they're actually offering access wise, and there's nothing. So it's kind of like they want the talent of autistic people because autistic people have extreme talents, but then they don't want to create an environment for them that means that they can thrive. So it's kind of like burning through people as if they're objects and not humans. So sort of a response to that is that I work with a really good friend of mine who is my producer. She's called Margot Douglas. And she's like the greatest producer I've ever met. She's so talented, but she's also like the kindest person. And I think that you really need that in a producer, because I think that in the film industry, you just need somebody that is with you the whole time and has your back. And especially if you have access needs as well yourself, just to have a friend who is also really good at their job is like just such an amazing thing to find. So I've been working with her, and I think right from the beginning, we both bonded on the fact that we've had experience with mental health and things like that. So right from the get-go, we were really open about how we wanted things to be. And we worked together for quite a while to try and find funding, and getting funding is very, very difficult. But eventually we got some, and we shot a short film together. And we kind of said to everyone on the team, like, this is how we want the set to be. We want it to be like a calm environment. You know, obviously we've got to get the film made, and we only had 2 days to shoot it because of the budget. But we want everyone to feel like if they have a problem, whatever level you're at, if you've got a problem, talk to us about it. If you're not feeling well, if you need extra help, anything that you need, just talk to us, and you can talk to me or Margot. It doesn't have to be like somebody who's like underneath us in the hierarchy. You know, we want it all out there. And I think by sort of just giving people the permission to say how they felt and to be themselves and bring themselves to the set, it just made for a really lovely environment. And I think that before having that film made and having that experience on set, I was kind of doubting myself, thinking that I could not make really big films, because I was like, how am I going to cope, you know, with all of these sensory things, with all of this, like, it's like stress transference for me. Like if people are like being stressed and like throwing stress into the room, I just absorb it and then I'll just feel ill. So I think having that positive experience kind of made me feel like, well, all sets should just be like this, you know, like, you know, you should be allowed to be unwell. There should be like people around you that can pick up for when you're not there. There should be like proper breaks. There should be proper food. You know, it's like the hierarchy of needs. First of all, there should be that basic stuff. But then on top of that, there should be like an invitation to be whatever you want to be. And I think that was important to me as a director as well, is that another good thing that Margot encourages is that, you know, you see like an image of a director and you think like a very confident white man with a big ego and a loud voice. And Margot was always like, no, but you just be yourself, because this film is your film and you're going to do it in your way. So like, I would sometimes just be like, I just need 5 minutes, and I would just walk off on my own. And in that space, I figured out what I wanted to do, and I just calmly come back. And I think, and, you know, talking to the people that worked on the set, they really enjoyed having that peace and having that kind of like level of communication between everyone. And I had a lot of fun as well. And I don't think I'd had fun on a film set of that scale ever. Like, I'd had fun kind of doing projects with maybe like 3 or 4 people, but this team was quite big. And I think for the first time, I was like, I actually really love this. So I'm going to keep doing it this way. So I think since then, me and Margot have just been very vocal about that. And we've been looking for opportunities to, make sure that we recruit people onto our crews that really need the opportunity. And also, do whatever we can to make sure that access needs are actually met. And, you know, making sure that there's money in place to do that. So, but it's a very difficult thing to try and battle against a film industry that is very ancient and has, its own way of doing things. But I think conversations are slowly opening up. So we just need to keep on being like, hey, we're here, you know, like, we've got this idea. So I think, that's going to be a big focus for me, is like not only creating my own work in that way, but also talking to other people about how they could change the way that they work and how they sort of see the people that work for them. And recently I've been doing like a bit of consulting with not particularly film industry, but like the arts industry, because I also like often go for like open calls and artist film sort of stuff. And there's a company that I worked with recently who just wanted to know like what it's like working in the arts industry as an autistic person and what they could do to make it easier for neurodivergent people to both apply for their opportunities and as like artists and freelancers, but also like if they recruited neurodivergent people into their team, what could they do? So I think, having that opportunity really was like, and everyone reacted really well to it. So I was like, maybe there is like room for all of these experiences that I've had and all of the difficulties I've had, like turn that into advocacy for people who are younger and maybe need the support.
And it's so interesting to hear you talk about like accommodations, you know, on a set, or, you know, if you're out on location, because they're not massive asks. They're not huge, like just having like no ridiculous hierarchy that you can talk to anyone at any level. Like that shouldn't be a massive thing to do, but you've done it, and you know it made such a difference. I think it would stop people from being, you know, nervous or, you know, worried if they didn't feel great and stuff like that. But also surely it's, you know, helping autistic people, but surely, you know, the rest of the crew and even those acting benefit from it, because it is a calmer, more like, I don't know, conducive environment in order to kind of work in. Like it's just
totally
nicer all round. Like what I'm saying is it's a win-win situation.
it really is, because I think that like any human will benefit from like more empathy.
Yeah.
But especially kind of like when you're doing something so vulnerable as creating a film and you're under that pressure, I think like having some extra understanding and a bit of kindness like thrown in there will just make the film better. And I think that that's the narrative that I'm trying to battle against in terms of like the mainstream industry, is that they believe that like it's all about money, really. I think that that's what it comes down to, is that they're trying to squeeze the pennies, and in that they're squeezing the people. But I really do believe that you can make a better product when people are happier. And I think that quite a lot of, you know, like bosses and CEOs, like there's 2 camps of people. There's like people that understand that productivity is better when people are happier. And there's people that like to sort of like have productivity at the price of burning people out. And maybe they make a lot of money, but if you look at the kind of like environment and the turnover of staff, it's a different story, isn't it?
Yeah, and you hear that so much with like TV and film, is that people just move on or move out of the industry because it's just, you know, their basic needs aren't being met. Like you say, like being able to have regular breaks, that's a human need. That shouldn't be something that we're talking about. It should just be done.
Yeah, totally. And like humans, we're kind of like, well, we're community-based people. And I think when you see like people around you not taking breaks, so even if on the set it says like, oh, you've got 45 minutes for lunch, if your boss in the camera team is eating his sandwich by the camera, then you're going to do the same, or you're going to forget to eat, or you're not going to eat enough. And I think, yeah, that's exactly what happened to me, is that you start to want to prove yourself because you'll do well if you sort of seem tough.
Yeah.
But yeah, I used to, like, when I was a production assistant, I used to like sometimes forget to eat, and then I would become like so overwhelmed and have to take like a 5-minute break in the toilet. And then I would feel so bad for being away from the set for 5 minutes, because like in that 5 minutes, another production assistant will have gone and done the job that I was supposed to do.
Mm.
So it's always like a competition. And I think that's another thing, is like when you're in like a competitive space, it's never a good spot for creative people, I don't think.
No, and I feel like, that constant worry, like you should, if anything, as a group of production assistants, you should have each other's back. You should tag team and be like, oh, you need the toilet, I'll step in, or like, and help each other. Not, but I get that it's such a competitive industry, and you want to, you want to make a name for yourself, and you want to go far. And I totally, get that in most careers. That's what people want to do. They want to climb the ladder. But surely if you were a nice person at the same time, it would would benefit, you
totally.
And what you're working on.
Yeah, which is why I'm so happy now, because like I said, like working with Margot, but also her production assistant Mena, they're both like the sweetest people. And from being with them, they've got like a circle of like camera people, like everyone at every department who are nice people. So we kind of like seek out all of the like the shy people and just work together.
That's great. Sounds like a nice group of nice, kind, slightly introverted people. Sounds lovely.
Exactly.
Maybe we could chat about a few of the things you've been involved in. So maybe you sent me some links to some of the videos that you've worked kind of on, and these include films and documentaries and things. But maybe we could chat about, first of all, the link that you sent me. That was the video to We've Created Invisible Systems and Structures, because I know that was it 30 autistic and neurodivergent like women, non-binary and trans people, and I feel like that would be like a nice kind of thing to chat about, like how did that come about?
Yeah, so I saw an open call by a company called Every Brain, which is run by one of my good friends now, not my friend at the time, but became good friends, Ali Wilson. And yeah, she wanted to create opportunities for neurodivergent people to make creative work, because I guess that she was fighting so hard to get opportunities that when she had them, she was like, well, I want to give back. So she did an open call for neurodivergent people who were either self-diagnosed or diagnosed. And at the time I was self-diagnosed, but was about to go for the diagnosis process. So I just emailed them, was like, is it okay if I apply? Applied, and I got one of, I think there was 3 artists that got chosen, and also like a bunch of writers that did like a poetry collection together. And yeah, I pitched this idea to them that I think I've always used film as a way to process what I'm going through. So I wanted to talk to as many autistic women, non-binary people and trans people as I could, so that I could understand what autism was like away from the normal presentation, or like the presentation that the media likes to put forward.
Yeah.
So I also made it through the pandemic as well. So I kind of recognized that I needed to do all of these interviews on Zoom, which actually worked really well. Sort of like this podcast, it's more accessible for people to do it in the comfort of their own homes. Like I managed to talk to someone who was in Italy as well. So there was like a real range of people that were able to take part. So the idea for the film was that I wanted to make a film that was very much in sort of like an artistic way of making things. So I think when you make sort of like narrative film, you have everything set out and you know exactly what's going to be shot. But in this way, it kind of it evolved with the people that I was making it with. So I put a call out online and like in papers and various like press to say, I'm making this film. here are the different ways you can contribute, because I wanted to try and make it accessible for people who maybe were nonverbal or just weren't comfortable to do like an audio interview.
Mm-hmm.
So you could either choose to do like an audio interview, a written response in an email, or you could do like a creative response. So like some people sent me drawings, and I basically like took all of those contributions, and either like people's voice would be in it, or if someone sent me like a drawing, I would like try and make a shot that looked similar to it.
Okay.
So I kind of had like this list of questions that I would ask people. And I guess it's got kind of similar to what you're doing, is that like I wanted to know about their special interests. I wanted to know about, how they see the world basically. And I wanted to make a film that was like a celebration of autism, but also really delve deep into like the mind of autism rather than just talking about the symptoms and kind of like the clinical idea of autism. So yeah, it was just an incredible thing to do. And I got to talk to so many different people. And as I was spending time with these people, like I think it was like 10 hours of interviews.
Okay.
And it got distilled down into the film, which is maybe like 12 minutes or something like that, or maybe even less, maybe
Wow.
9 minutes. So I spent a lot of time going through these interviews, and the whole time I was just like, this is my life. Like it's so crazy just how similar, like even like doesn't matter where people lived, whether they were like, cis, trans, non-binary, like we all had the same kind of feelings about things, and it was just astounding. So I think making that film really solidified that I wanted to get, diagnosed and go through the whole process.
Mm-hmm.
And then the film was shared, because it was still during the pandemic, so it was shared on like a live stream. And we had so many people tune in, and loads of people got in touch to be like, yeah, I've never heard anyone talk about autism this way. And it seemed like a really important thing to do. So I think that from the experience of doing that, I kind of said to myself, like, oh, I'll do this, and then like autism will be out of my system then, which is like what I feel like with a lot of my ideas is like I just have to do it, and then maybe I'll move on. But there was just something that stuck, and I think that I was like, no, there's just so much more that is unsaid
Mm-hmm.
about autism, and so many experiences within autism that aren't represented in that film, that I just wanted to continue with it. So I'm still on the autism research.
And I was going to ask you, like, where the video In Motion, was that after? It was. Okay, so because that's all about kind of like stimming like freely, and it was so like, I'm going to link everything I'm talking about in the show notes in case anyone wants to see these videos, but it was so nice to see people like just stimming freely and being themselves, like whether that was through like dance or just kind of more like movement based stuff, but it was something like you just don't really see, like, and I'm so used to kind of suppressing my own stim that it almost like inspires you to get moving.
Well, that's good to hear, because that was kind of the idea of it, is because I think part of the reason why I didn't think I was autistic for such a long time is that I was reading up on it. When I started to think about autism, I was like, yeah, I've got all of these things, but I don't stim, so I'm not autistic. And then I realized, like you said, that I was doing like micro movement stim. So I was like wiggling my feet in my shoes, like, because I'd always had like public facing jobs or like office jobs or on set, that I guess I masked so much that I wasn't stimming. And I think that that's why I was getting really ill, because I just wasn't doing it. So, and then I realized that I'd been doing like dance, which is kind of like, I guess it's like an acceptable way of stimming, like I got quite good at dancing.
Yeah.
And I think that people sort of celebrate you dancing, especially like if you go to a club or something like that. I know a lot of autistic people don't like clubs, and I think I like certain aspects about clubs, but what I really love is like loud music and dancing, because it's like a controlled sensory experience, and also like a way to express yourself. So I think when I realized, like, one of my friends messaged me once, because I started posting these videos of myself dancing online. And one of my friends messaged me who's autistic, and she was like, you know that you're stimming, right? And I was like, am I? And she was like, yeah, think about it. Like, think about when you want to do it, like, how does it feel? And what does it feel when you're doing it? And I was talking to her about it, and she's like, yeah, you're stimming. And then I was like, oh my God, like, it's like, because I would always get like whenever I was on the bus, I would get sort of overwhelmed because I absolutely hate going on the bus, especially in Manchester. And I would like listen to really loud music to obviously block it out. But I would always feel like I wanted to move and dance, but I would just never let myself. And I think I said to a friend that what did I say? I said, does everyone like hold themselves back from dancing on the bus? And she was like, no. She was like, I don't want to dance on the bus. And I was like, oh, I thought this whole time that everyone was just walking around pretending. And she was like, no, I think that's just you. And I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, so I wanted to make emotion as a way to be like, let's stim, because it's really, it's an important thing to do, but it's also such an important way of expressing ourselves. Like when we're struggling to talk or when language doesn't explain things properly, I think the body can show so much and it can express so much that I just wanted to show how lovely it is to do. And also to kind of like open up that conversation, because yeah, there's obviously a lot of discourse online about parents trying to stop their kids from stimming, or you know, teachers in schools and this kind of thing. So yeah, I just wanted to make a film that talked about that. And I think there's so much more to talk about it, because the commission that I got to make in motion was quite a small amount of money, so I made like a very short piece. And I'm really proud of it, and I think it works that it's so short because it's just like easy to digest.
Yeah.
But I definitely want to make more about stimming, because it's such an interesting topic as well.
Yeah, and you can really, I just get such a sense of like joy from watching it, because especially being autistic myself, I know what it's like to suppress, and it sounds like you do too. Like you don't realize, but suppressing this and keeping it bottled up all day, it's not good for us. Like if anything, it's detrimental to like our mental health, and like you're saying, like burnout and things like that. But to see it like framed in such a positive light, and like you say, not trying to you know, remove it from children kind of thing as a bad behavior, and seeing it actually like as a positive thing and like embrace yourself, it was very refreshing.
Well, thank you so much.
I wanted to ask you slash kind of fangirl over the film that you made called The Water Tower. So I've watched it a couple of times, and I'm going to link it in the show notes because it is the most atmospheric, like beautiful thing I've watched in a very long time. And like I need the whole film. Like it's such an interesting idea, and I love the like, I don't know, just like the wild kind of like wilderness sort of vibe to it, but also the like underlying scariness of like this signal and stuff. And I'd like to know if it had like hidden meaning and stuff like that, but it was too short. It was too short, damn it.
Yeah, I mean, I think so I made that film with like no budget at all, which is why it's so short, and I kind of had to like get rid of a lot of scenes from it.
Okay.
So I think there's potential there for it to be like a feature film or something that's like, yeah, much more explored. But I had to kind of like make something really snappy. But I think it's really interesting that you talk about that film, actually, because I think for a long time I've hated it, because it's such a weird film. And I think that like now looking back on it, I think it's super autistic. And I think that it's really a film about like feeling like disconnected from the rest of society and finding someone that feels the same as you.
Yeah.
Which is like sometimes my experience with partners that I've had is that, yeah, you find somebody that kind of understands your loneliness and also feels the same. So it was kind of about that. And it was about like tapping into sensory things as well, which I didn't realize at the time. I just like, I write things often and they just sort of like fall out of my head, and I'm like, oh, well, I don't know. I think these days I'm very good at being like, oh, well, that's what that's about. But I wrote that film when I was maybe 26. So I think I was, didn't know I was autistic, was kind of like going through a very difficult time. And I think I just wanted to make something that just got all of those feelings out there. And it was also a film about Cumbria as well, and about how at the time I felt very rejected by the place, because growing up in Cumbria, it was quite difficult to be queer. It was quite difficult to be someone who was different. So it was a way for me to kind of make peace with Cumbria and kind of see it for what it is, and kind of like address some of the, I guess, the trauma that I had about it. And I worked with such incredible people on that film. Like both of the people who acted in it, they're not officially actors, they're both artists in their own right. And yeah, it was really interesting to work with them and kind of play around with performance. And the films that I'm making at the moment are much more sort of professional, and they also make a little bit more sense. There's a film that's going to be playing in Manchester Film Festival in March, and it's probably the most narrative film I've made. Okay. So it's interesting for you to come back to that piece of work that's really like, a lot of people have watched it and been like, what what is going on?
But it leaves you with like so many questions, and like you want to know like more about the people in it, but also like this underlying, you know, thing with the water tower. And it just, I don't know, I just found it really like captivating. And it's interesting like to hear that, you know, you're going to have, you know, more like narrative stuff out there. Do you think that will go on your like Vimeo as well? Because I was going to link that, like obviously eventually.
Yeah, eventually it'll get released online. I think first of all it's going to play in quite a few festivals. So far it's been like doing pretty well in the festival circuit, so I think it has to stay private for a little while. But if anyone wants to email me or get in touch with me, I can send you a private link, or I can like sort of, I post a lot online about where it's going to show, so if anyone wants to go to the cinema and see it, I think it should be playing in quite a few places in the UK.
Okay.
So yeah, that should be nice. But yeah, I definitely want to make more narrative stuff. It's just a case of finding the budgets to do it, because it's so expensive.
Yeah, I didn't realize the, like obviously like with some professions, like, you know, research and like scientific stuff, you hear about funding, etc. But you never really hear about like it within like the kind of film industry at a kind of smaller or like production scale, if that makes sense, rather than like, you know, the big streaming services and stuff like that. Like the fact that you have to kind of seek out stuff in order to make your film a reality, like is that totally. Like, do you find that kind of difficult? And maybe like the admin side of things, because obviously you're having to be everyone, you're not just being like a writer and director, you're doing all this background stuff as well.
Yeah, totally. I think before I started working with Margot, I found it really difficult, because I think like keeping your own energy to keep on trying and keep on applying for stuff, and you obviously get lots of rejection, so yeah, it's like dealing with that. So I think once I met Margot and I had this person who was like, you know, we're going to make films together for life and we're going to be friends for life, I was like, oh well, I can just relax a bit more now. So we both split the admin, which is really nice. So I often do kind of an initial draft on things, because I'm quite good with like writing in the moment and getting ideas out there and explaining kind of like the creative side of it. And then she does all of the writing about like logistical stuff, and she deals with the money, which I really hate dealing with money. So it's good to have a producer that, she loves spreadsheets and I hate them. So that's like a match made in heaven. And also just someone to be there to be like, encourage you. I think like Margot's very good at that. And I think she recognizes like how much reassurance I need, because yeah, a lot of my work is very personal. So you're writing about it and putting yourself out there. And then just to have somebody who looks over it and goes, yeah, this sounds amazing, then you can just relax then, because someone's checked it for you and like, yeah, got around my OCD.
Yeah. And just having someone on your side and also someone to like sense check things, I can understand that would be like a great, like, you know, not just accommodation, but, you know, through like a friend as well. That must be really, I don't know, just like reassuring.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think it's really, really comforting. And I think that sometimes like, as an autistic person, I might sort of interpret things in a different way. So it's good to have her to be like, no, actually, that's what that person meant. Or like we worked with like other people on different projects, and maybe they would say something that I would sort of misunderstand. So Margot would like explain it to me and be like, no, everything's going fine. Like, it's just that person has like a different tone to their voice, or like, or like, oh, this person's just a bit stressed, so that's why they seem this way. And I'm like, oh, it's not me, you know.
Yeah, it's not personal, like it's more how they're feeling, which is hard. Like if you don't get those like subtleties or those hints, it's nice that she can almost like interpret that for you.
yeah, she's very good at that. Yeah, she's like, one of the most empathetic people I've met. So yeah, very lucky to work with her and have her as a friend.
Oh, that's nice. We've gone on for almost an hour. I was going to ask you about your hobbies and special interests, and then maybe I'll ask you about where we can find you on social media. Obviously, filmmaking sounds like it is kind of a lifelong special interest and maybe potentially hobby. But do you have time in your life for anything else?
Yeah, I think the older I get and the more I've realized like that it is important to have special interests outside of my job, because I guess I'm lucky that my special interest became my job, but it's also work at the same time. So yeah, I do have other ones. Big into video games, so I play like all kinds of video games. Very into Pokemon and always have been. So I think that's something that I always come back to, which I think is a very common autistic interest. Was into the cards and all of that, but I think more recently it's just been the games. Yeah, so I think that that's like a kind of like a comforting thing that I come back to. And then I also have like interests that kind of like I get into for an extreme period of time, and then I'm like, oh, I'm done with that now. So at the moment I'm massively into bouldering, and I think that through realizing that like stimming is really important, I've been doing more exercise, because I think when I was a kid I was super athletic, so I think I've kind of brought that back into my life a lot more. And like there's something about bouldering, about like the sensory aspect of touching the rocks. I mean, they're fake rocks, but
yes,
and also like the colors of the rocks, and the fact that it's like a puzzle as well, so you have to like figure out where's best to go, like how you're going to move your body, and it's like a full body experience. So I think that's been like the best newest addition to my like special interests. And then I also think like science as well, like I'm massively into like reading research papers and generally just like nerding out about different topics and things like that.
That sounds like a nice mix of like like you said, like more activity based and more like kind of, you know, like indulgent, like Pokemon, like gaming and stuff. It sounds like a nice mix. So where can people find you on the internet? Obviously I will link these all in the show notes so people can actually click on them easier.
So on Instagram, I don't really use Twitter at all. Like I've got a Twitter account, but it's not super active. So Instagram's probably the best, like, easy way to find me. And it's just at Sophie Broadgate. And my website, which has got like a collection of my work on that's available online, is picayafilms.co.uk, which, to spell it, probably go into the show notes. And then I also, if you really want to find some very old work, I also have a YouTube channel, which is called The Rainy Day Video. And there's kind of like a back catalogue of old video diaries that I used to make. So if you really want to go to town, then you can do that as well.
Amazing. Oh, well, thank you so much. I will, as I said, link those all below. And thank you for sharing
thank
a little
you so
bit
much.
of your life.